Everyone. So for this video, we're going to be talking about how to organize your informative speeches. The last video that you should have watched was the informative categories. So this is how you take those categories and you put them into some sort of organizational pattern. So there are three types of organizational patterns that you could possibly use to put your speech into something that makes sense for your audience, those being topical, chronological, and spatial organizational patterns. Now let's get started first with topical patterns. So topical patterns will take a large idea, whatever the topic is of your speech, and we're breaking that large idea into smaller ideas or what we call subcategories. So we're trying to find what logical divisions there are to this bigger thing. Now, let's take an example like board games. Board games themselves are a pretty big topic area. We could talk about board games like the simple family ones like Monopoly, which I guess if your family hates each other, Monopoly. Things like Sorry, etc. Or we can get into the more complex ones, the ones that are more indie games, etc. But one way that we could organize a speech about board games is by making the main points, breaking up the main points according to, like, say, competitive types of board games. So like something like Monopoly is your first main point. Then your second main point might be cooperative style board games. So games like Pandemic. And then your third main point, we'll talk about hybrid versions of board games, things that are competitive as well as cooperative. So something like Settlers of Catan. So while it's competitive in the sense that you are trying to get 10 victory points, be the first player to get 10 victory points, you also have to trade resources and whatnot throughout in order to reach that goal. So there's a hybrid element of it. So we're taking this larger idea of board games and we're breaking it up based on competitive style, cooperative style, and hybrid style board games in order to talk about board games in general. So the only thing with topical patterns is that there typically isn't too much rationale behind which order to put these main points in. It just kind of is up to you as the speaker in terms of what you think will make the most sense for your audience. For this example with board games, if we say competitive, cooperative, and then hybrid is the last one, that kind of makes sense because you're combining those two previous elements of competitive, cooperative. But talking about cooperative first and then competitive second, it really wouldn't matter. But what you want to do is basically consider what would be the most effective. And on top of that, think about what we consider the primacy effect or the recency effect. So whatever's first are things that are going to be that your audience will remember typically. The last thing or the most recent thing you've talked about will be the most likely that they will remember. So maybe put your strongest points first and last. And whatever isn't maybe the strongest, you can keep in the middle if you absolutely need to keep it in your speech. So after topical patterns, we have chronological patterns. Now these are taking your informative topic and you're structuring it based on time or sequence. So you might trace the development of an idea or a product, an event. An example that I wanted to introduce was the evolution of Kanye West. So if you're a big Kanye West fan, you want to talk about the evolution of Kanye. Your main points could be, if you wanted to organize it chronologically, then you could say, you can talk about his different albums and go in chronological order in how that evolution occurred. So you'll start with College Dropout, and then maybe the next main point is Graduation, and then your third main point, Jesus is King. And you'll talk about how Kanye West has developed as a rapper through those different albums, basically how that evolution has occurred. So you're organizing it based on time as well as sequence because those go in order of when they were released. Now, the last organizational pattern is spatial organization. This one's typically rarely used within speeches because there's kind of a little bit less application for it. Um, but basically, you're organizing your speech, your main points based on their layout or proximity to each other. So if we're talking about a specific place, then um, we might use a spatial pattern. So say you were giving a speech that was giving a tour of Congress. So um, if you're giving a tour of Congress, you'll talk first about the main chamber, and you'll explain walking in what you'll see in the main chamber, and then we'll go to the House, where the House of Representatives are, and then we go on the opposite end and we go to the Senate, and see where the Senate is within Congress. Um, so that can be a way that you can use a spatial pattern. But again, it's kind of a rarely used pattern, but it can still be useful, especially if you were trying to do something creative, like give a tour of a certain place. So, some things to consider when it comes to organization. Each of these organizational patterns has their own strengths and weaknesses. And it's really just kind of dependent on what your audience would be most interested in, what's going to be most effective to use to get your point across, to inform your audience in the best way possible about your topic. Can your topic be broken up? Can it be broken up topically? Can it be broken up chronologically, spatially? And if they can, what's going to be the most effective way to organize it, to break it up and organize it? So with that, the last thing another thing to consider is try to stay as objective as possible. A lot of times we want to try to convince our audience that something is really good and that they should do something, but try to stay away from that, because that's where it kind of goes into the realm of persuasive, and we want to keep your informative speeches as objective as possible. So that's pretty much it when it comes to organizing your informative speeches. If you have any questions about organizing your speech, again, reach out to me. If you have any questions, I'm more than willing to help. Otherwise, good luck to you, and I'll see you in the next video.